Hello and welcome once again to Literary as Feck, and we have ourselves a guest host this episode in the form of go right ahead there, horror host Gav Crimson.
Hello. Or a host of me, I don't know.
Yeah, so is this the first time? Is this the first time you've been on this particular?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Gav's been on our film crack a couple of times. But yeah, first time on Literary Respect. And what have you chosen for us to talk about?
Well, we're doing a Guy and Smith double bill of bamboo gorillas and thirst.
Quality.
Okay.
Quality all the way.
So maybe, Gav, you can kind of tell our audience who may not know who Guy and Smith is a little bit about Guy before we get into the
Who
books.
possibly doesn't know who the mighty
I suspect some people out in the world might not know who Guy Smith and Smith is. So,
Well, I sort of came to them these books relatively recently, but I always knew of them growing up. You know, the sort of you see them on book shelves, Night of the Crabs and all those other sort of things. But I didn't really read one of them until relatively recently. But I remember, maybe my stepfather was always picking these up during the 1980s. I sort of vividly remember a lot of the covers, but no, I didn't really experience them until relatively recently.
What do you think? What do you think kept you away from them?
I don't know. I've never been that much into books really. I was always like a sort of child of the sort of video era, so that I thought I've gravitated a lot more to film and books.
Also, in general, you weren't. It wasn't just Guy and Smith. You weren't a trashy paperback reader in general.
No, it's just a habit I've picked up recently.
Oh, okay. Well, it's better late than never because it's a fun thing to be a connoisseur of, I think.
But what sort of astonishes me though is sort of learning about stuff like bamboo gorillas and the like. How much these books got away with compared to what was going on in the video industry at the time. I mean, it never seemed to, as far as I can tell, it never seems to have been any sort of censorious backlash to
No.
horror. I can't see it, which amazes me. I mean, considering how clamped down it was on film, video, and TV. But
I think as long as your covers stayed away from driller killer territory or something like that, then I think you were probably all right. And maybe every now and again, probably some local PTA or something member would have found little Johnny's copy of Bamboo Gorillas and then complained to their school or something like that. But no, you're right. This whole area seemed to kind of, and like you said, I mean, some of the stuff in one of the books we're going to be talking today, I mean, if you even attempted to try and film it, it would just, no, we're not having that anywhere, but particularly in
1977 England.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. You're right. It was kind of unregulated in a way that almost all other media was highly regulated. And I think about comic books as well, right? That in the States, you had your EC comics in the 50s, and then there was a massive backlash to then. And then you didn't see anything interesting in comics really until the underground, until people who are going to go right outside of those strictures. But yeah, it seems like if you wrote it down in a novel, you could just about get away with anything.
Yeah, and without an age certificate or anything either.
Yeah, no, as far as I can say, on any of these books, you never see any sort of age restriction. Whereas even some of the more irresponsible sort of pre-state videos, sort of you wanted on adults only or not for rental to minors or stuff like that. I've never seen anything on books like this.
No. I mean, that's one of the things that attracted me in I mean, my entry point, I suppose, to more adult reading, including the first Night of the Crabs, actually. But at some point when I was a preteen, I think I started rooting around in our attic, and there were boxes of paperbacks up there. Still not quite sure whose they were. Some of them might be my dad, some of them my brother, maybe my mother even. I mean, I'd like to know, because there was at least 2 or 3, so someone had a fetish. There was at least 2 or 3 of those like post Falconhurst Mandingo, like slave kind of erotica books up there. And James Herbert's The Rats. And I remember, you know, I was just the right age for interest in horror and stuff. And well, oh, was this a, you know, Rats Attack book? But yeah, there would be, you know, sex scenes every now and again as well. And, you know, the first time I'd be reading and then kind of, oh, look over my shoulder. Oh, no one's, oh, what's this now then? And so that was an unexpected bonus, that as well as rats eating infants, also had something to feed my early stirrings of my loins, right? And then, yeah, I think around the same time, I must have discovered, I think Night of the Crabs was up there, and they had on them as well. I remember, in the tradition of the Rats, right? They always had that on the
like library. Funnier than Police Academy. You can always tell a quality video when it refers to another movie that it's ripping off.
So I read an answer to your previous question off air, Nick. When did you first discover Guy and Smith? Mine would have been Night of the Crabs. So
yeah, right at the right age, I feel like.
I think so. Yeah.
But that said, so for me, it was way later on, and so Clive had asked me or recommended to me that I watch Garth Marenghi's Dark Place, the TV series, which, as it turns out, is kind of a parody a little bit of Guy and Smith and probably Sean Hudson and James Herbert and the rest of that crowd. And I had no idea about any of these people. I think the first British horror I remember reading was like Clive Barker, right? And that, you know, at that time there was that breathless quote by Stephen King, like, I've seen the face of the future of horror, whatever it was, and it's Clive Barker. So I had no idea that Clive Barker didn't just erupt out of nowhere, that there was actually a kind of there was quite a few ultra gory, you know, paperback writers in England at that time, and that he was just maybe the most artistic or finished version of that.
More surprising is that there wasn't a Guy and Smith book with a Stephen King blurb, seeing as everyone got a Stephen King blurb.
I have a terrible case of crabs.
Yeah,
the future of horror is
Guy and Smith.
But so yeah. Anyway, so Clive lent me some of the Crabs books, and I was completely smitten right away. They were fantastic, and
I remember as well, because they were, because I'd read Night of the Crabs when I was younger, and then around that same time, for some reason, I had suddenly had an inkling for the sequels, so which I'd never read. So I don't know to this day if you've ever actually read the original Night of the Crabs, because I wouldn't have had that.
I don't know if I have either. Yeah, right. Maybe not. I
remember what was interesting about them is they were, because in Japan at the time, so you just ordered whatever the cheapest one was, and it was the Dell American paperback versions. What was weird about reading them, I remember, was they'd adjusted them ever so slightly for the American marketplace. So they changed everything from pounds to dollars and things like that. But everything else was exactly the same. So it was really weird. It was like set in some kind of strange alternative future UK where everyone spoke like British people, but they bought things in pounds, and it was very weird reading experience.
And then I think around the same time you let me Slugs 2 Breeding Ground by Sean Hudson, and at that point I was this stuff is fantastic. And then I also quite enjoyed how right wing the later Guy Smith Crabs books. I mean, I think it's kind of there, it's embedded early on, but like there was something hilarious about how many lefty, trendy kind of folks get murdered, or like environmental activists who are like, no, protect the crabs, and then they get snipped in half. And
someone smoking a pipe nearby going, bloody fools.
Yes. And so and some of that stuff is definitely going to come up today. But I will say that for me, maybe most astonishing is that Bamboo Gorillas book, which I assume we'll start with because it's chronologically the first one, 77. Because it's like, what is that thing? And there's nothing on the front cover that gives you the impression that this is basically a porn book. Like, and not just a porn book, but a particularly, egregious Marquis de Sade type of porn book.
The front cover just looks like it's something in the Battle Picture Library or something like that, right? Like it's Burma Squad or something like that. Or...
Yeah.
But with a sort of horror book from that era, or a biker book or a skinhead book, you expect the sort of sexual element to come in, but then with a sort of World War II novel set in a Japanese prisoner of war camp, it doesn't exactly strike you as being, this is going to be a non-stop orgy.
No, although it did make me wonder about like the timing of all of those like Italian, World War II sex camp films, right? Because there was a bunch of them, some quite highbrow, like your Night Porters, and then some, considerably less. What's the one with the crazy hairy beast who just like rampages?
The Beast in Heat, is it called?
Yes, yeah, exactly, yeah. And this definitely. So I was starting to think like there weren't really many of those kind of films with a Japanese, context, right? They tended to mostly be.
I
couldn't really think of any actually off the top of my head, other than occasionally made by. Oh no, I guess not maybe the sex thing, but the torture thing in like Man Behind the Sun, right? Which is
but that would have been different again. That would have been set in China and the kind of experiments and things, as opposed to
it's not really sex thing, and then some of that, weirdly enough, some of the Japanese stuff made around kind of the 60s, 70s, where they were trying to process what had happened. But anyway, it was interesting. He took that really ultra sleazy Italian approach to what happened in Europe, and then applied it to an Asian setting.
It's a shame Bruno Mattei never got around to
adapting it.
Yeah. So we should mention Guy N. Smith died a couple of years ago now as well, right? And I suppose got into writing relatively late. I think in his 30s, right? And Bamboo Gorillas is one of his, because once he started, fucking hell, he just churned them out, right? I don't know how many there are altogether, but there's a shitload. I think that's the correct term. A shitload of Guy N. Smith books. And it's always a bit of a, like I think I'll probably work my way through most of them in my lifetime if I get a chance. But it's piecemeal. I don't think I would ever go on a Guy N. Smith jag. It's very hit and miss, isn't it? Like you might get a Night of the Crabs, or what's the other one I quite like? Sucking Pit is quite good fun. And the one we read actually.
I like the Festering.
Festering was fun, but some of them are quite boring, to be honest with you. I think there's one called, is it called Throwback or something like that, which is about like a caveman or something, and I was Locusts wasn't much good, or some of them are sporadically fun, like you have one ridiculous gory set piece, and then the rest is just quite boring. So yeah, I think I will read them all eventually, but sometimes it's hard going. You never quite know, but that's kind of the fun, right? You don't know which one is going to be. Have either of you read any other Guy N. Smith books that jumped out, other than these two?
So all the Crabs books I've read have been great. None of them have disappointed me. But
that's true. Most of the Crabs books are what they deliver the goods, clickety clack.
And I like the festering because it was so disgusting, and because I once suffered from quite a bad case of boils in my 30s when in Japan, and it really brought home to me the absolute discomfort and unpleasantness of that couple of weeks. And that is going to come up again in
great.
in the thirst.
Discovered any gems to during your late conversion to Guy Smith, Gav? Any?
It was sort of went through the crabs sort of ones first, and then the stocking pit, and first, and did the first two, of course.
I haven't read the second one yet. Is it as up to the first one, or?
Sort of more low key, I'd say. Sort of more akin to sort of the festering. Sort of,
Okay.
you know, yeah.
Well, the festering is pretty gross.
Gross.
Out there.
Yeah, but like Thirsty sort of like a sort of doubles as a sort of disaster movie in some
Yes.
ways. Yeah,
It's a bigger canvas, isn't it?
It's apocalyptic, is that for sure.
But Thirst 2 is just like set in one small village, sort of.
Oh, okay.
A lot more smaller scale, sort of thing.
See, I might prefer that because I've read a few Guy Smith books where he goes that, you know, it turns into like Survivors or something, and I'm not sure if he's quite as good at the bigger stuff than like a village, or in the case of the festering, it's just someone's garden, pretty much, right? I mean,
yes, pretty much. It's a hole in somebody's garden.
I think he's better at that stuff because, as we'll talk about when we get to Thirst a little bit, I'm not sure if he's quite dotted his I's and crossed his T's in terms of like the epidemic of thirst kind of gets out of control in a way that I didn't always quite understand.
Yes.
It's reminded me of, like, you know, films which are like, you know, oh, someone's, you know, poisoned the water supply, and then like a truck explodes or something for no reason. You're like, what's going on? Just to make it more exciting.
But anyway, we should start with the bamboo gorillas. So, Gav, do you want to kind of take us into the sweaty, leech-infested, mosquito-laden swamps of? It's Singapore. Like, where does I even lost track of where this book is taking place.
It's Malaysia, isn't it? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, this is quite clever what we've done here. We've set it up so Gav talks about all the really contentious stuff, and we can get away with it. It wasn't us. It was Horror Horse, Gav Crimson, sir.
So we have Colonel Hugh Carter, also known as Jungle Carter, who leads his men deep into the jungle in order to team up with Chinese bandit like Chew, is it called? And the bamboo gorillas are sort of a mixture of like Chinese and Malaysian mercenaries who sort of helping Jungle Carter to try and rescue some nurses who've been captured and taken to a rather nefarious prisoner of war camp, lorded over by the dreaded Colonel Thicker, is it?
He's a bit of a Kurtz-like character, I suppose. Kurtz with a hard on, right?
Oh, God. Yeah. Also, like initially, I mean, the first couple of chapters of this look like sort of fairly traditional World War II novel where they, you know, trekking through the jungle, the sweat and the heat and stuff like you know, you think you're just getting to get something traditional here. I just wonder what point you sort of realise this is sort of sending you up Sleeves Creek without a paddle. I don't know. Maybe the part where one of them starts masturbating. You know,
warm.
Quite early. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
No, it doesn't take long because the thing is, the whole thing all told is like 138 pages, right? So it just zips along. It's a high dose.
Yes. Propulsive would be one word for it. There's not a lot of time for taking a breather in this book. You get down to the nitty gritty pretty quick. But it's interesting. So I mean, it's set quite early in the war, right? because basically it's right after the kind of the fall of Singapore and Malaysia. And you know, it's funny because Clive and I read a book not that long ago about the war in the Pacific, and kind of about how shocking it was to the Americans and the British, the way that those kind of I guess you like colonies almost, right? You know, fell before the Japanese. They really didn't think the Japanese were going to be a force to be reckoned with at all. And then there was a bit of a shaking up of everyone's, you know, sense of self when that happened. And then so this book is an interesting. It's kind of that. It is almost that kind of corrective of like, nope, we are men, and we're gonna show you what's what.
Yeah. So if anyone did listen to our episode on Len Levinson's The Rat Bastards #1 and thought, well, that's a little tame, then Bamboo Gorillas is maybe you might have been waiting for.
Oh, that wasn't the book I was thinking of. I was thinking of the one that we read that was actually the history book about.
Oh, okay, we did do that as well. Yeah.
Right. But yes, you're right. We did do a book somewhat in the same territory, not nearly as scummy as Bamboo Gorillas.
I suppose this is a rare example of him sort of writing about a foreign location. He seems to have written, most of his books seem to be like, you know, set around Birmingham or Shropshire or like rural Wales, you know, where he actually lived at various points. But I think it does a fairly reasonable job of sort of evoking this sort of jungle environment, even though it's not what he ever, you know, personally saw himself. I mean, I sort of wonder what sort of mental image you'd get of, you know, Guy M. Smith having reading this book in 1977. I mean, could you believe he was like some sort of old World War II guy who was reliving his youth, you know, fighting and fucking his way through the jungle?
No, I don't think you could ever. I don't think anyone would be reading this and would. I don't think it smacks of authenticity, right?
No, although I think you're right though, Gav. I do think like that, like he does do a good job putting across the setting, but when it comes to some of the dialogue, some of that stuff, it just seems it comes right out of like those battle action comics, or you know what I mean? Like some of it's just like, wow.
Yeah. I'm genuinely surprised at no point did we get the line of dialogue. Like not
yes.
even once. That was surprising to me.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, like sensitive readers beware, but there's an awful lot of, you know, Asian peril, a lot of throwing around of words like half caste and stuff that I think nowadays we'd be like, ooh, Guy, maybe don't.
It made me think of like, it's a real shit. It's like if Avon or Joe Davian or someone like that had been given a big budget and got to do like a scummy New York City hardcore take on Fu Manchu or something like that. Like, you know,
Right.
like with Jamie Gillis in yellow face makeup or something.
Yeah, no, I can definitely see that.
Yeah. So yeah, the wanking Captain Seeker and his raging erection, which he has to keep covered up all. Yeah, he's basically gone AWOL, and he's kept this prison camp is just he's got a whole bunch of, which is such a great comic book conceit, right? That they've dragged this bunch of nurses,
20 nurses, yes,
straight out of like
a sex camp,
Roger Corman film from the 70s or something. But instead of three of them, there's like 20 or 30 or 40 of them. Yeah, and crammed them into this black hole of Calcutta, like kind of harem, and yeah, it's just it's rape-tastic, right? He's having the time of his life, is Captain Seeker and his men. Until the
Jungle Carter shows up.
Jungle Carter turns up, and to be fair, Jungle Carter is Jungle.
Yeah, he's pretty horny fellow himself for a guy who's like constantly facing down death.
In fact, it made me laugh out loud towards the end of the book. There's after they've been through all this stuff that should be just entirely traumatic, right? But I don't think it is the Jungle Carter. It might be another. I think it's Jungle Carter actually. Yeah, he's you know, made love to one of the nurses who ends up being the main emperor, and his line of dialogue is, "Jungle warfare certainly had its compensations." which I thought was just brilliant. Like
Yes,
after all that, it was basically a horny schoolboy going, but hey,
Well, yeah, he does get his end away multiple times, and with the two nurses, and I also quite like the bit then when the second nurse, she's kind of our action nurse, because she's the one who finally does in the dreadful Captain Sika, but she's initially like she's happy when she finds out that he has shagged her roommate. She's like, oh, I'm glad she had a moment of pleasure before her death. It's like, okay, guy, all right.
Well, it's real cake and eat it stuff, isn't it? Because it's every horrible atrocity that happens he always makes sure to first say in detail quite how disrobed they are, or the proportions of their figures and stuff as they're about. Yeah, I mean, and there's a whole sequence where it's set up like this outdoor orgy, like elimination contest where they fuck for their lives, or they'll be bayoneted, I guess. And there's another horrendous sequence with it, like where they're using people for firing practice and then bayonet practice and that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's pretty full-blooded stuff, right?
Yes. Yes.
And it's interesting. It is. Some Guy and Smith stuff in recent years has become a bit easier to find, at least in Kindle form, right? Someone's been republishing. I've noticed Bamboo Gorillas hasn't been reissued as of yet.
Yeah. I mean, I know this the National Front gets into releasing paperbacks. Might be a while. I don't know if it's. I mean, again, you don't want to.
Proud Boys proudly present first time in paperback since 1937.
It's a weird thing when there's an element or a grain of truth in anything like this, right? But there is no question that there was a lot of atrocities that took place in Asia during World War II, right? But the question is, when you kind of boil it down to this, and then when you have such coded racist language throughout, it all gets a bit muddy then, and you're like, okay, and when it's obviously so salacious and so prurient, you're like, but there is, you can't deny that terrible stuff happened in Asia at this time, and that the Japanese, army, and certainly the military police, the whatever they're called, they named them in this, right?
The Kempotai.
Kempotai, yeah. That there was, awful stuff happened. But yeah, does it excuse the rampant, and also that I think it's the more broad Asian stereotype stuff, when they'll say stuff like, he showed no sign of his emotions, because Japanese people never show how discomfort. I'm like, well, I lived in Japan for 10 years and plenty of Japanese people show the discomfort. Clearly, I had plenty of kids who endlessly complained about stuff that wasn't really uncomfortable. And I'm like, so that always makes me laugh when I read that really kind of stoic. Yeah, that whole thing of it also shows up in a lot of stuff about indigenous Americans and native people, where it's the same thing, and you're like, well, no, I again lived on a native reserve for 3 years. Everyone there has a really good sense of humor, and no one is stoic. Where this whole thing comes from, I don't know.
In case anyone doesn't know, Nick's working on his magnum opus when he's going around the world, busting
visiting all the stoic people.
Stereotypes. Yes.
Yes. And there's at least 6 Irish people who aren't alcoholics that I know personally. So I'm going to stake that claim as well. Not everyone in my country is a raving drunk. But yeah. Anyway. Back to the book.
Well, I mean, as
go ahead.
much as I enjoyed it, I'm not exactly sure how much you can really say about Bamboo, because really, I mean, it's the ultimate interchangeable bayonet as cock book, right? All the way.
Yeah. It certainly does end abruptly. You're like, We're done.
Yeah.
But apparently he wrote a sequel to it, but that's never been seen the light of day. So yeah, it does feel like he's setting up a sequel towards the end, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah.
But I wonder if maybe one of his children dusted off a manuscript or something, and I was like, yeah, okay, no one's reading this.
Yeah.
This makes the first one just like a warm-up or something. But it is interesting. You do have to wonder as well, like, because you get the sense. I mean, I don't know much about Guy Smith other than the books. I don't know much about him as a person or personality. Although apparently he did win Best British Pipe Smoking Championship in 2003. But I never got the sense that he was like unlike say for instance Sean Hudson or someone like that. There's always that slight tongue-in-cheek element where you feel as if they're fully aware of quite how over the line they're stepping or something like that, right? But with Guy and Smith, it seems like that weird slight naivety or something of someone just writing something for the marketplace, and you're not quite sure if he's aware of quite how fucked up he's getting sometimes. And then when you read something like this as well, you're also wondering, like, how much are you getting a kick out of this writing it? Do you know what I mean? It's interesting. And to Gav's point before as well, the fact that you could have wandered in to a W.H. Smith's and took this home.
Yeah, on the tube.
Read
it as a kid. Can you imagine?
Yeah, saying that, I mean, I remember seeing like Night of the Crabs on the bookshelf and Slime. I never remember seeing Bamboo Gorillas though. So I don't think it ever was like republished during the 80s and like on the horror stuff.
Right. Yeah. I don't think there maybe wasn't the market. But then again, I suppose as little kids, we would have probably been drawn towards the horror section more anyway, though, right? So,
but I suppose maybe by the 80s, he was so like synonymous with horror that sort of republishing one of these sort of non-horror books would sort of confuse people.
Yeah, in the same way as his books on hunting and things like that weren't.
It certainly seems the case that all of his non-horror stuff were like he wrote a few books about truckers. Just a few like confession books, sort of imitation confession books, and Disney adaptations.
That one.
They never came around during the 80s. So it seems to be more diverse horizon when he first started out, and then I guess the horror stuff really became successful, and he just concentrated on that.
Yeah. How many variations on can you bring apocalypse to a small English village, right? Plus I kind of do remember seeing the Bamboo Gorillas cover, I think, but maybe not, like you said, maybe not in W. Smith's or something, more like in the boxes at the local market.
I was going to say, you might have had to ask for it from your newsagent in a brown paper bag, like sealed. They would slide it across the counter to you.
I do remember seeing it in secondhand bookstall boxes and things, and if I had known what it was, I would have definitely picked it up. And it would have only just sped up my inevitable perversions to where they are now, right? It just got there a bit quicker, that's all. I would like. I hope that sequel
sees the light of day.
The light of day one day. Yeah, that sounds like.
It's funny. So I remember years ago I was in a secondhand bookshop and they had this entire wall, and they were all books by Dean Koontz, but he had like 27 other aliases, and again, he'd written like westerns and sex books and science fiction books. And then it was relatively late in his career that he settled into his writing effectively the same horror book over and over again, and really making his name with that. So, Maybe it makes sense you throw a lot of mud at the wall earlier in your career, and whatever sticks is the thing you go with, right? So crabs stuck.
Ew, that sounds nasty. No getting those crabs.
But there's a nice segue here though, because am I not wrong? But isn't the kind of like how do you say it anyway? The WWII machina, the whatever that term is, right? Isn't the way that they kill the crabs in the first book by spraying them all with weed killer? Or am I misremembering this?
I can't remember.
Possibly, yeah.
Feel like it is. I feel like there's a weed killer sort of plot point that's pretty big in the original Crabs book.
Well, in that case, shall we move on to the next one then? And
we can always circle back to that.
I'm actually going to quote the book itself.
Okay.
How you British say, fuck off? There we go.
All right, perfect.
Thirst, which is from a little bit later on, right? This is 1980.
1980.
What's going on here then, Gav?
Oh, well, sort of, he's unleashing a virus upon Birmingham. He's like a truck driver, sort of swerves to avoid a rabbit or something, and then and ends up crashing a truck in the truck full of weed killer, and then sort of contaminates the water supply. So it's turned the population of Birmingham into sort of possibly using mad killers.
Clive, could you say the name of that friggin' town that's like 27 letters long? Okay, you're great. You have something in your mouth right now. Yeah, there is. So it begins in Wales. And that's where and I do love the fact that, in typical sensitive Guy N. Smith fashion, all the blame for this is laid on a crappy wife who won't put out enough for her husband, right? Forcing him to take his massive truck full of weed killer off to the boonies of Wales, where he's shacked up with some girl, and then, crashes it into this reservoir that feeds the entire Birmingham. Yes, but I read it several times.
That is classy, right? Later on when he brings it back.
Oh yeah.
This all could have been avoided
if she just put out.
Yes.
Have you ever read Bats Out of Hell?
No, no. It seems to anticipate, because I was reading about this in connection with, I read a review of the Thirst, and it mentioned this, and I was like, did he anticipate COVID like 30 years before it happened?
It's a sort of similar sort of premise, and you sort of, again, Birmingham being put under quarantine. And this is a much more sort of gory variation of Bats Out of Hell. But in Bats Out of Hell, but contaminated, sort of bats that have been experimented on, sort of escape from a lab and then sort of pass on a flu-like virus to the population. Birmingham has to be quarantined.
So literally what happened in 2019.
Although in Bats Out of Hell, it's all a woman's fault.
Of course.
Yes.
Well,
so that's
we don't know.
That's what the N stands for. That's what the N stands for. Guy Nostradamus Smith.
Right. I think it's Newman, actually, but still.
I don't know, maybe no filter. No filter.
Right. But anyway, we don't know. Maybe there was some Chinese lady who was responsible for those pangolins or whatever the hell they were getting out into the wet markets. Anyhow, yes. So how do you
her husband any as well?
Of course.
Yes.
Of course.
Yeah.
So how do you say the name of that place, Clive? Do you know?
Llanfair Pwllgwyngyll, Gwgerwch, Llyn-Drobwll, Llantysilio, Gogogoch, I think. I might be missing a bit.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah. What's that got to do with anything? It's not in this book.
No, there is in fact a very long Welsh name.
No, that's a very normal sized. I didn't write it down, but, yeah.
Anyway, okay. So yeah. So our hero is awesome. Right. Ron Blythe, if I'm remembering this correctly. Yeah.
Good
he's
name.
Amazing.
It's a solid Guy N. Smith character name, isn't it? Ron Blythe.
Yeah, he certainly seems pretty blithe to the fact that he's entirely responsible, or at least largely responsible for what's happened. And he
No,
doesn't
Nick,
give
it's not
shit.
his fault. It's
Of
the
course not.
bloody wife of his.
Wow. I kept expecting him to at some point kind of have a moment of like recognition of, like even at the beginning where his wife is given out to him because like that kid drank a bottle of your weed killer and went mad and stabbed himself in the stomach and died, and he's kind of like, stupid dad leaving that weed killer in that bottle, like completely, like he's got a mental partition.
Yeah, it's the same thing with Bats Out of Hell. It's like scientist, and he goes through the whole book sort of, angrily refusing to accept any responsibility. Even when people break into his house and urinate on it, it's still.
It's not my fault. Wow. Yeah. So this thing, I have to say, actually, the setup is really effective. I really liked the kind of the whole opening part, the truck going into the reservoir, the questions about, whether or not this would affect the water supply in Birmingham, and then the kind of the little scenes of like, the first guy who goes mad, and then there's a lot of yobs in this book as well. Clearly 1980 England was a terrifying place to be. It's just all football hooligans and skinheads, and just, just like it wouldn't have mattered whether the weed killer was released or not, because apparently England was this close to tipping anyway, judging by this book.
And you know why, Nick? Because women weren't giving it up. Seems to be the main thesis of the book.
But yes, and right away we get into kind of pustules and just the weed killer seems to really do a number on people.
It doesn't take long. The one thing I'd say he's quite inventive. The one thing I thought, that's quite clever is not the right word, but it's something that didn't automatically jump out as a way to go, but makes quite good sense compared to some of the other stuff in the book, is the fact that the weed killer also turns the water flammable.
Yes.
So the fire brigade can't even put things out because they just make it worse. I thought that was quite a neat touch that ratcheted up everything a little bit. But still, I was trying to place this. I was wondering if Gav had better memories of than me. But I was trying to place this in, like, so for instance, if this happened, like, say, nowadays in Birmingham, obviously there would still be, a certain amount of unavoidable. But as long as the authorities like announced it soon enough, right? You can imagine people would, okay, we're not going to use the water taps, and we'll just buy bottled water, right, from the supermarket or whatever. Of course, there'll be a run on it, but basically people can buy bottled water. I was thinking 1980 Birmingham. I mean, was it still like a bit of a kind of novelty to have bottles in water? Maybe is that why this spreads so quick? Like, how many people were buying bottled water in the 80s in the UK? Probably not that many, right? I don't think.
No, you're right. Yeah.
So I suppose that's the thing that I suppose it makes a bit more sense in the context of the time, because while you're reading it now, you are thinking like, just fucking buy bottled water, because like that's what happened here, like post earthquake, when everyone was worrying about if there was, everyone just went out and bought bottled water, and
or Coke or anything else that comes in a bottle, beer, just.
I don't remember bottled water until 1990s. Yeah, you're right.
Yes.
So I thought that kind of, that just to be fair to the book in the context of time, maybe that, like you were saying as well, Nick, obviously because the whole country was full of football hooligans and as well. So there's that, and then, but still there are some other bits which are like, you do wonder, like there's a few brilliant, there's a, just as if it wasn't enough carnage, there's like a plane crash. For no reason at all, as far as I could tell. Like, there's literally, it's talking about the airport and how crowded it is, and there's people trying to escape, and there's no one coming in. Fine, okay, I get all that. And then all of a sudden, and then a plane collides with another one, and a head lands on the tarmac. What the fuck is this got to do with anything? And there's
Yeah.
motorway pile up as well that happens, and I'm still not quite sure.
Well,
what
that,
the
I mean,
connection.
actually, this
Oh,
is
okay.
really interesting. So, because I read a fairly lengthy review on maybe Goodreads, somebody had done a lengthy review, and obviously somebody who really knows their Guy and Smith, and was explaining that there are two characters in this book that may be autobiographical sketches of Guy. So Guy was apparently a bank
Yes,
worker whose dad was a bank worker who bullied him into going into banking.
Yeah, you can feel that stuff is
the rage.
I've never read so much venom directed at the banking industry.
And that sort of slightly creeps into Bamboo Gorillas. Uncle Cart's the sort of in civilian life. He worked in a bank and he
You're right.
Yeah, and
he could never go back there. That's he says it.
Well,
he'd rather die like he'd rather die like a man than live at the bank.
Die in a bank.
And jungle warfare certainly has its compensation.
But yeah, anyway, so apparently that whole section of the book is very basically a thinly veiled autobiography of just how frustrated he was. And apparently his dad passed away just a few months before he wrote this book. So it may have been some kind of way of working through the anger. Anyway, so that's why that pileup happens, because that guy, that character, he tinkers with his dad's car to murder him, basically.
From the beginning. Do you think that was? I thought that was like a bit of a throwaway gag. You think that might actually be true?
I thought he had done whatever he did to the car, and then the car went into other cars.
Okay, I wasn't sure where we're supposed to take that seriously or not, because you're in Guy and Smith world, I suppose. Maybe so. I was trying to pinpoint as well exactly how and why, when and why did the electricity go out?
Right. Yes.
That's the other stuff I could kind of, even on a stretch. I mean, there's another great one as well. But at least they explain the person, like the plane thing just happens out of nowhere. But there's also a train crash.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
But you do get the lead up to that, right? Because it's the signal operator.
Hallucinating or whatever because of the weed killer poisoning.
But I couldn't figure out why the electricity went out at what point and why.
The fires, maybe? I mean, because he does describe half the city's on fire as well, right? It's this raging inferno, which they keep spraying flammable water onto.
The other one as well that I couldn't quite figure out is, okay, you can't drink the water, fair enough, but you can still loot the supermarkets and stuff for food. I don't think it's necessary to resort to cannibalism quite as quickly as the people. So it's like that fucking film Them Rock, right?
Yes.
Madness pretty quickly.
To push it further, though, that it was the scene where the first person shows up with a metal frisbee and starts winging it into people's heads that I was like, wait a second, we've now moved into fully Mad Max territory. How many days has this epidemic been going on that we're already at roving street gangs with
I really get a sense of the timeline.
The death disc, I think.
The death disc, yes.
But because I got the feeling just reading it, I don't know, a week maybe.
Yeah, it feels like we get to death discs surprisingly fast.
It reminded me of it's like that. I can't remember where this is from, but it's that gag, isn't it? Is like something starts going just slightly wrong, and then someone's like, throwing the table up in the air, smashing telephone. The people are just waiting. They just need just a little trigger, and
push over the edge,
and off they go. Or any excuse they wanted. They're dragging nurses out to a jungle camp, and
I will say, actually, from the point of view of just structure. I was frustrated that when they did introduce the escaped lunatic axe murderer, that they had introduced that character much earlier in the book. Like, I think it would have been, I think it was, the book does this thing where it'll introduce characters right before they're relevant to our main characters.
Yes.
And I think it would have been cool if we had seen him like right near the beginning of the book, like being transferred, and we're like, oh, I wonder if we need to pay attention to that guy.
Oh, I disagree, Nick, because what I like about this, it's not a million miles away from, if you remember the Young Ones episode, where Vivian makes a potion that turns people into homicidal maniacs,
yes.
and puts it in a Coke bottle, puts it on top of the fridge and says, I really hope no one drinks that.
Yes, yes. And it's a cure for not being a homicidal axe maniac.
Exactly. And of course, sure enough, one of the Blofsky brothers drinks it. And
yeah,
what does he say? Boys and girls come out to play on the BC motorway.
Yes, yeah, it's all coming back to me now.
Yeah, so no, that's perfectly fine. That's as it should be in Guy and Smith world. First is a bit too long, I think, isn't it? It's, what is it? How many pages is it? It's like
230, 240-ish. Yeah.
Somewhere between Bamboo Gorillas and this would have been the sweet spot.
Yeah. 175 pages would have been probably ideal.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really ever drag. There's so much stuff going on, so much incident in this book that you could probably have stretched it across 3 books if you were a normal writer. But it just bang, 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 bang.
No, I like the 200-page thing, because that's like a 3-hour read or something. So, but I like those books, because those books for me, those are Saturday night books. Those are books that go out with me on the balcony with a bottle of wine and some cheese, and I want to read the whole thing from beginning to end in one sitting when I'm pissed, and then go to bed and have dreams about it, and But what's annoying is when you read a book like this, which is perfect, you're pissed on the Saturday, and then sober Sunday, you've still got 60 pages left. And you're like, what am I doing with my life? What am I still haven't read the classics. What the fuck am I reading this for? Yeah, but that's a personal thing. Maybe that's very specific to my reading.
yes, maybe. No, I have to say I had tons of fun with both books, but especially with this, actually, because I have a real soft spot for that kind of like George A. Romero kind of, Dawn of the Dead, the Crazies, or the Cronenberg stuff around this, that time as well, like Rabid and stuff. That idea of this kind of like low budget apocalypse, and to me, this book kind of says low budget apocalypse. Yeah.
So this one also, Gav, if I'm correct me if I'm wrong, this one hasn't been reissued in recent times, right? There isn't a cheap Kindle of this, I don't think.
No, I don't think so. I mean, a lot of his stuff, you usually see it all the time in second-hand bookshops, but you just don't see those still. For some reason, the Guy and Smith stuff seems to really become collector's items stuff. I mean, you see like lots of second-hand copies of Stephen King and James Taylor. For some reason, the Guy and Smith, and you look at this stuff online, it's like really expensive to get.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It definitely has become more collectible, but like I said, some of it has been digitized. You can get Kindle versions, and I can understand why maybe Bamboo Gorillas isn't yet. But I don't see why this. I haven't got around to this yet. Because a lot of the Guy and Smith stuff you can get like cheap. They're like $2-3 Kindles, right? Alligators, I think, and maybe Bats Out of Hell, the Crabs, the Sabbat books as well. You can get them; they're cheap as chips. But Thirst, I don't think so. And also, you mentioned there's a sequel as well, right? So, should we be reading the sequel, Gav? Should we?
It's okay. It's not on the grander scale of that, but yeah, he's pretty good. Yeah, I think moments. Yeah.
Yeah. No,
maybe not an essential one, but yeah, one of the better ones. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because like we said, it's a bit hit or miss, but worth. I've never read any of his werewolf books either, actually. Some of those are quite hard to find now as well, I think. Yeah, I don't know what the rhyme or reason behind why some things get reissued and some don't. I'm not sure.
Are those books about guys who become werewolves because their wives don't put out, I assume?
Probably.
Yeah. Well, I think when he was alive, he seemed to have like embraced the internet. And, you know, looking at his website, you're taking it back to the Wayback Machine, like selling second-hand copies of his books, like ebook versions of them, and things like that. Obviously, now he's passed away, and you know, I think maybe his family are sort of in the process of republishing and sort of getting that business back up.
Yeah, I think it's his company, right? Black Hill Publishing or whatever it's called. I think it's them that are putting out the Kindles, I think.
Yeah.
It's funny though, I will say for this kind of thing, like I always feel there's something a little bit antiseptic about reading this stuff on the Kindle. And funnily enough, although we won't say exactly where we read this, it was nice for me that it was a yellowed copy of the book that I was reading, even though I was reading it in a digital format. It looked like I'd taken it out of the library myself, and there was like cigarette burns in some of the pages and stuff. But that's exactly the way I want to read a Sean Hudson or a Guy and Smith book. You know, it's like in the bathtub with like the stench of like the yellowed pages. It's just it's really immersive when you read like a horror book in that way. But that might be my perversion, I suppose.
Just piss on the book before you get in the bath.
There we go. Perfect. Trying to think if there's anything else about there was so much stuff going on in Thirst that like, because then he also meets a girl halfway through and then gets his end away quite a bit. I mean, as all
that happens in most Guy and Smith books.
Yes.
Oh, and all going on about his vasectomy as well.
Oh, yes. Yeah, the way he opens up immediately and like gives her his entire life story about 20 minutes after meeting her about how he's in a failed marriage and had a vasectomy so he can have his end away with other women. Yeah, he's like, this all sounds eminently reasonable.
It's licensed to commit adultery, I think.
Yes. And then immediately she's like, and also I'd like you to have it undone so you can pregnant me, which I noticed is actually a feature of the Bamboo Gorillas now that I think about it. There's a whole section where she's like, please knock me up. Oh, well. This guy actually married. Like, was he married and had kids?
I believe so,
He's probably, perfectly normal. He just got all his weirdness out in his
rage onto the page. Hey, well,
which is the healthy way to go about it, I suppose. And we are all richer for it because we have gems such as Bamboo Gorillas to pass on down the generations. I don't think it's ever been translated into Japanese. I'm pretty sure.
Probably not. Although it did make me. When last time we talked about this stuff, you had said that your wife had more of a sense of humor about that stuff than you would assume, perhaps.
Well, if it's so when it's so ridiculous, right? When it's so over the top. I mean, you can't take it serious. It's more offensive if someone tries to approach it seriously, right?
Okay. Yes, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like all the leprechaun shit, which is endlessly amusing to me, but
you're not really actually going to take offense. What are you saying now? No. You think I come from a race of underground dwelling midgets with
midget fairies?
Gold? How dare you besmirch my family name? No, it's
okay. Yes, I suppose when it gets pushed back.
I'm likening war atrocities to leprechaun. Oh, for fuck's sake!
Yes,
this is a rabbit hole we shouldn't have gone down.
Probably not. Let's pull back. Pull back. But I think that what we need to take away from all of this is, if you're a wife, you need to put out.
Yes.
And don't drink weedkiller.
No.
And if you get to run a sex camp in the jungle, don't fall asleep.
No.
I think that's we can all I'll say that was one thing that surprised me and kind of impressed me about the Bamboo Gorillas is that the person who appears to be our main antagonist dies quite a bit earlier than I thought he would. Like he dies.
Well, also the nurse, one of the nurses as well. I didn't expect her to escape
immediately.
Yeah.
Yes.
it gets a bit sort of I spit on your grave sort of.
Yes.
She was on to kill that Japanese soldier as well, arousing him, and then
Yeah.
Totally.
If only she'd seduced one who was retarded as well, it would have been perfect. It would have been.
It's like a scum bingo. Like, ooh,
Yeah.
We ticked all the boxes for scumminess here.
Yeah. So anyway, good job, Gav.
Yes, thanks, Gav.
We enjoyed this. We blame you.
Passing on the Guy and Smith virus to others.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Yeah. So excellent.
You develop an intense thirst for bad horror novels.
I'm getting quite thirsty now, actually. Yeah. So until next time, how you British say fuck off?